The Warsaw Ghetto in 1942 was a city within a city, a labyrinth of narrow streets, collapsing buildings, and hidden courtyards where life struggled to survive under the weight of occupation. Smoke from makeshift stoves filled the air, mingling with the acrid stench of waste and overcrowding. Families crowded into single-room apartments, children played among rubble, and every face carried the exhaustion of hunger, fear, and hopelessness. Guards with rifles patrolled the streets, their boots clanging against stone, eyes scanning for anyone attempting to escape or resist. Into this chaos walked a young woman with a notebook clutched tightly in her hand. She was barely in her 20s, but her resolve was iron. Irena Sendler, social worker, had seen too many children ripped from their mothers, too many families vanish into the unknown. She could not stand aside. She would act. Her plan began quietly. Sendler had connections through her work at the Social Welfare Department and through Polish Catholic organizations. She began recruiting people who could be trusted in the most extreme circumstances: priests, nurses, friends, even teenagers. Each recruit understood that failure meant death, yet each accepted the risk. Sendler's network had to operate with absolute secrecy. She mapped routes in her mind, memorized addresses of safe houses, and organized the movement of children with precision. She trained couriers on what to say if stopped, how to disguise children, and how to remain calm under the constant threat of discovery. Every detail mattered. A single mistake could unravel everything. The methods of smuggling were inventive. Children were hidden under firewood stacked on carts bound for areas outside the ghetto. Some were concealed in ambulances, disguised as patients being transported for care. Others were placed in laundry baskets, suitcases, or boxes marked as deliveries for sympathetic convents. In one operation, Sendler smuggled children by having them walk behind her with dolls, pretending they were merely orphans she was relocating for charity. In another, she used the confusion of funerals, placing children inside coffins to sneak them past checkpoints. Every child's identity was meticulously recorded on slips of paper, with their name and parents' names written carefully. These slips were placed in jars and buried in her garden, a hidden ledger of lives saved. Even if the children's new identities were changed, Sendler could one day restore their true names. By mid-1943, her network had rescued hundreds of children. Every day brought new threats. The Gestapo increased patrols, raiding apartments and rounding up anyone suspected of aiding Jews. Sendler had to move constantly, using false identities and disguises, sometimes entering the ghetto posing as a nurse inspecting the sick or as a worker transporting supplies. Children learned to hide in attics, basements, and secret compartments built specifically for smuggling. Convents and orphanages took in children under false names, understanding that discovery could mean execution. Despite the escalating danger, Sendler pressed on. Her dedication was methodical. She tracked each child carefully, updated her records in secret, and rotated routes and safe houses to avoid detection. She created contingency plans. If one courier was caught, another would take over. If one home was raided, children could be moved to a secondary location. By late 1943, she had smuggled more than 2,500 children out of the ghetto. Each rescue was a calculated risk, a combination of courage, intelligence, and relentless attention to detail. Then, in October 1943, the Gestapo caught up with her. They raided her home, arrested her, and took her to headquarters for interrogation. They beat her severely, breaking her ribs, bruising her limbs, and attempting to force her to reveal the names of children and collaborators. For hours, she endured torture without giving a single name. She refused to betray anyone, protecting her network even as her own life hung by a thread. The Nazis sentenced her to death and took her to a prepared grave. Guards lined the site, shovels in hand, ready to bury her alive. but her colleagues had bribed some of the guards. At the last moment, she was smuggled out and hidden in a safe house. Even after surviving torture and a death sentence, Sendler returned to her mission. She continued to organize escapes, place children with foster families, and maintain meticulous records. Her courage was relentless, her planning precise. She understood that every child saved was a future reclaimed from the machinery of genocide. Each day brought new dangers: Gestapo raids, informants, betrayal, and the constant knowledge that a single misstep could end the lives of those she sought to protect. Yet she persisted, driven by the understanding that the lives of thousands of children depended on her skill and determination. The children themselves bore the marks of this ordeal. Many had been separated from their parents at a young age, thrust into new homes under false identities, and taught to hide their true selves for survival. Some faced suspicion or hostility from the families who sheltered them, yet most adapted, learning quickly how to navigate the new world around them. Sendler visited many of them in secret, offering reassurance and comfort, always careful not to attract attention. By 1945, as the war drew to a close, Sendler's efforts had saved approximately 2,500 children. Each name buried in a jar in her garden represented a life preserved, a family that could be reunited, and a triumph over unimaginable odds. The jars remained hidden until after the war, when they were unearthed and the children's true identities restored. Thousands of people survived because one woman refused to accept the inevitability of death, horror, and oppression. Warsaw itself bore the scars of the war: bombed-out buildings, streets littered with rubble, and communities decimated by disease and deportation. Yet amid the ruins, the lives saved by Irena Sendler grew into families, doctors, teachers, and witnesses to history. Her network had created not only a lifeline, but a legacy, proof that careful planning, courage, and relentless determination could defy the machinery of extermination. Irena Sendler's story is remarkable, not because it was widely celebrated at the time, but because it demonstrates the extraordinary lengths one person can go to save lives under impossible circumstances. Each decision she made, every smuggling operation, every hidden jar in her garden, was a calculated gamble with human lives at stake. Her courage under torture, her refusal to betray collaborators, and her unwavering commitment to children she had never known make her one of the most extraordinary figures of the Second World War. Even decades later, survivors remembered her with reverence. Those children, now adults, could trace their lives back to a single social worker whose planning, bravery, and compassion defied the most brutal regime in history. She had acted quietly, invisibly, methodically, and yet the lives she saved resonated across generations. The streets of Warsaw would eventually be rebuilt, but the memory of those dark years and the courage of Irena Sendler remained. She moved through fear and terror with clarity and precision, using intelligence, planning, and human empathy as her weapons. The jars in her garden, once buried under soil, became symbols of hope, resilience, and defiance. Her story is a reminder that in the darkest of times, a single determined individual can change the fate of thousands. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.